Hello, and welcome back to Biodiversity Impact, a podcast exploring the journeys of scientists, sustainability experts, entrepreneurs, creators, and others who are working towards a more nature-positive future for people, planet, and profit. I'm your host, Bez, and today I'm very excited to be outside of the podcast studio in a very special place indeed. We're currently at Danum Valley, a conservation area and field station surrounded by primary pristine tropical rainforest in Sabah, Malaysian Borneo. You might be hearing some cicadas and frogs and birds in the background during this interview. Today I'll be interviewing Professor Tim Bonebrake. Tim has been working as a global change and tropical conservation biologist for the past 20 years. He is now the director of the Hong Kong University School of Biological Sciences and is the author of a new popular science book, Crime and Pangolins, Conservation and Public Health Lessons from a Mammalian Murder Mystery. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, it's good to be here.
So Tim, to start us off, what do you do as a global change and tropical conservation biologist? And can you tell us a bit about your background and what brought you into this field?
Yeah, so I study a range of questions in conservation biology. And what brought me to the field was, I think as a kid, I was just really into birds mostly. My parents brought me to national parks. I grew up in Los Angeles, but they would take me to national parks in all over the country. And that really drew me to nature, it drew me to biodiversity. But I didn't really know how I wanted to make a career out of that until much later, until I was in college. And actually at the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do policy or science. And eventually through experiences in college, I actually worked in a congressional office, which I enjoyed, but I didn't like the actual work. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of busybody stuff. So I realized I didn't like the actual work of being in a congressional office. But then I worked in a science lab, and I realized that was also very tedious, but I really enjoyed it. And so that kind of solidified my decision to go into science. So now, 20 years later, I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm collecting a lot of data, going to the field, mostly in tropical field sites. I'm trying to collect data on insects and mammals and birds and reptiles and anything I can get my hands on, and basically trying to bring data to questions that we need answering regarding the conservation of global biodiversity.
Fantastic. And collecting data must be challenging in these environments.
It's one of the biggest challenges. So a lot of what we're doing in me and my lab, we're going out to the field, we're collecting the data. It's very arduous, it's very difficult, but for me and most of the people in my group, that's what we enjoy, is actually getting out and seeing the animals and seeing the plants and actually getting the data. But we get data in other ways as well, and actually probably the majority of our time is actually synthesizing data, bringing models to the data and trying to make some sense of it all.
You've named a number of species there, from insects to mammals to birds. Which is your favorite group to work with? Yeah,
so in undergraduate and mostly as a kid, I was into birds. But I realized birds actually, they're not ideal for a lot of the different types of like climate change questions I'm interested in, because birds they're endotherms. Some birds are very sensitive to environmental disturbance, but I realized butterflies are actually a much better, in a lot of ways, for the questions I'm looking at. They're much better kind of indicator species for how like climate change will affect biodiversity. And so I started working on butterflies during my PhD, and really was attracted to them as a system. And actually some of the very, very first studies in the late 1990s showing that biodiversity today is being impacted by climate change was on butterflies, because we have a long history of butterfly data collection in the UK and in the US. And so what we call these fingerprints of warming, seeing butterfly distributions shift north, which is consistent with our expectations for how biodiversity respond to climate change. So that really drew me to butterflies. And then for my PhD, and even today, I'm really interested in how tropical butterflies and tropical biodiversity is responding to climate change. And what we're finding is that it's data limited, so we don't really know what's happening to tropical species in climate change. But there are a lot of reasons to believe and be concerned that tropical insects and tropical butterflies will be particularly vulnerable to climate change.
And this week we've been out with some students actually surveying butterflies in the rainforest and teaching students how to do that for future research and future biodiversity monitoring to answer these important questions. So, working in global change and tropical conservation biology can be both inspiring and demanding. What is it that keeps you motivated in this space?
Well, so you just mentioned the fact that we've been out with students and we've been teaching them how to how to collect butterfly data, and that's one of the main things that keeps me going. So very lucky as a professor to be working with talented and engaged undergraduate students who really care, are really putting the effort out, and so that's the thing that keeps me going. And I get to work with them every day, so I'm very lucky in that regard. But it's not just the undergrads. People I come into contact with through all of my kind of job activities. I'm fortunate to work with different NGOs, government officers, and one of the things that you learn in conservation is everyone really wants the same thing. We all have different constraints. We all have different kind of missions, like specific missions. But in general, everyone wants the same thing, which is to conserve biodiversity. And you know, there are major challenges, as you say, and it can be depressing sometimes. But one of the things that that does give me some hope is the fact that there are a lot of people who really care about this and are really trying to overcome these challenges.
Yeah. It's really inspiring to see other people working towards the same sort of vision and same vision for conservation, and it feels more like a team effort.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, it's not a field where, at least for me personally, you feel particularly lonely. I feel like a lot of people are really trying to get at this issue.
Yeah, really also willing to help, because it is a really, collecting data, for instance, from certain areas is really challenging, and you do need a lot of collaboration, and to be open to that is really common in this space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, no journey is without its obstacles. What are some of the key challenges you've faced in your work so far?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I face as a tropical biologist is data. Yeah. So we just, in the UK and in Europe and the US, there are these massive stores of data for butterflies, for example, and birds. And so ecologists and conservation biologists in those regions can use those data sets, and answer like important questions about how the environment is impacting, environmental changes are impacting biodiversity, and then what we can do to actually conserve biodiversity. In the tropics, we really have to make some big assumptions. We have to make big guesses, because we just don't have the data. The diversity is much greater, but we have much less data, and so it makes for a big challenge. My own kind of personal take on this is that we can use quantitative modeling and to kind of fill in some of the gaps and to make educated guesses.
Yes.
And my hope is that then we can put in policy and conservation interventions that will be effective.
So just to give us an idea of what the data gap is that you speak of. So when was, for instance, the data starting to be collected from Europe compared to the tropics?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite kind of thought experiments is, I haven't looked at this recently, but I looked at like 10 years of papers studied on the butterflies of England. And it was, I think it was like 3,000 papers in the span of a decade. Okay. And then I looked at Brazil, and I think it was like 300 papers or something like that in the same time period. But then you have only about 60 butterfly species in England versus, I think it's 3,500 in Brazil. You can start to see some of these major gaps.
Yes.
We're starting to fill that. So as you say, I think in the past decade or two, a lot of countries have kind of ramped up their monitoring programs and data collection. And so we're starting to get like bits and pieces where there are good data sets for things like tropical birds and tropical insects, butterflies, but still we're pretty far behind. And we don't have the long-term data sets. So the nice thing about like Europe in particular is they were collecting data in the early 1900s, and you can then look at decades of change, and that's often the time span you need to really see and document the effects of climate change.
Yeah.
So in a place like the tropics here, when we don't really have those data sets, we're really kind of piecing things together and making educated guesses.
So a lot of challenges to actually start getting the data from the tropics now. Do you think new technology is going to help with that?
Absolutely. I think, one of the things that I've been excited about, I haven't tested it, but these automated insect identification systems and things like that. iNaturalist, I'm a huge fan of.
It's amazing.
It's great. In a place like Hong Kong, where there's a really engaged naturalist community that helps the kind of training data and the identification process, I'm always very impressed. Yeah. So I think things like that are a really big opportunity for us.
Looking ahead, what are your thoughts on the future of global change and tropical conservation biology, and what gives you hope, and what should we be paying attention to?
I think in this space there's a lot more attention and a lot more appreciation of things like nature-based solutions and the importance of humans in sort of these ecosystems, and the importance of nature for contributing services and goods and everything else for people. So those things are starting to be better incorporated into policy and conservation interventions, and so I have a lot of appreciation for that. In Hong Kong, for example, there is a lot more attention being paid to the forests of Hong Kong. They're small; they're not going to be capturing a ton of carbon, but even the little amount of carbon that they are capturing, people are starting to appreciate and pay more attention to that. In Hong Kong, we have wetlands. And people are starting to value those wetlands in a way that they didn't 10 years ago when I first moved to Hong Kong. So I think that this is really important, and these are ways where once people really start to appreciate and value tropical ecosystems, then we can leverage the resources that we need to better conserve them.
Do you think the shift in terminology from ecosystem services to nature's contributions to people has helped in some way?
I don't know, honestly. And I don't even remember what it was before, but there was another term prior to ecosystem services. So I kind of feel like I don't know if the exact terminology is all that important, but what I do think is important is that as time goes on and these concepts get better developed, better articulated, we start to have better frameworks for applying ecosystem services or nature contributions to people, whatever you want to call it. That I think is really important.
Yes.
And I think that is what is helping to better mobilize those kinds of frameworks and concepts.
Absolutely. Most of it is an exercise in science communication, really, and to, as you say, leverage the resources to the correct places.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited for you because you are also the author of a new popular science book, Crime and Pangolins, Conservation and Public Health Lessons from a Mammalian Murder Mystery.
Bit of a mouthful.
A bit of a mouthful. Can you tell us a bit about this book and what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, so I became interested in pangolins a little over 10 years ago. I was actually doing research on butterflies in Cameroon in Central Africa. And I started seeing on the ground the kind of consequences of wildlife trade, pangolins being traded, and that kind of drew me to this question, and I started working on the pangolin trade, recognizing that in Hong Kong it's a big central point for a lot of the trade in pangolin scales and other wildlife trade products. So I'd been working on pangolin wildlife trade for some years, but it wasn't until 2020 when myself and a lot of other people were in lockdown.
The rest of the world.
Because of COVID-19, that this news came out that COVID-19 may have emerged from pangolins. And that kind of, I suddenly became really interested, recognizing that I actually had some expertise in the subject of pangolin trade. And I did kind of a deep dive into this subject and leveraged a lot of my laboratory resources and got some funding to investigate this issue more thoroughly. So the book is really about that and about the research you've been doing mostly over the past 5 years, but also beyond. And it's a true crime story.
Amazing.
So it's, what if you get a pangolin scale in the trade, where did it come from? How did it get there? Who are the people who are responsible? And then what do we do about that? And so going back to this public health question, there are reasons to be concerned about pangolin trade and other wildlife trade with respect to zoonotic diseases and diseases coming from the trade. Whether COVID-19 came from pangolins, we still don't know. There's not a lot of evidence for that. But there are SARS-related coronaviruses in pangolins. So this is certainly something to be concerned about. So yeah, the book is about not only the public health kind of questions relating wildlife trade, but also what are the conservation issues, how do we address them?
Really interesting. And what are the conservation issues facing pangolins?
Yeah, so they're, like all biodiversity, pangolins are threatened by habitat loss, and they're threatened by climate change, and they're threatened by everything else. But one of the main issues for pangolins, and for a lot of other species around the world, is overexploitation.
Okay.
So they're being hunted to extinction, all pangolin species around the world. It depends on the place, it depends on the location and the kind of the scale of the trade. So the Asian pangolin species are particularly threatened with extinction because their location close to China and Vietnam and the places where there's a heavy demand for pangolin products in traditional medicine markets. But increasingly over the past 10, 20 years, that demand has then been kind of moved to Africa. So a lot of the African pangolins now are also threatened with this overexploitation because they're being hunted. And that's what kind of drew me to this question initially, was seeing in Cameroon that people were hunting pangolins and getting additional profit for the scales that were then being sent to China. It really kind of drew me to this issue of the internationalization of some of these biodiversity threats. And the fact that being in Hong Kong, most people don't know about Cameroon, never heard of it. And most people in Cameroon don't know anything about Hong Kong, and don't know anything about China.
Yes.
But there's this really tight link, an important link, that has these major biodiversity consequences. What I find really interesting about the pangolin trafficking is the fact that it is so global in nature. You have all these pangolin species in Africa and in Asia. They're part of these really complex transportation networks and largely illegal crime syndicates that are sending pangolin products around the world. And there is also, and so that's very clear in the pangolin case and the wildlife trade case as well. But it's also true in climate change. So one of the things that really struck me was some years ago I was working in Gabon, and I was working on in an oil field. And it's actually a protected forest in Gabon. They're doing oil extraction, but otherwise it's a really nice forest, and it's quite well protected. But it really struck me that all of this oil is being extracted from this country, and then it's being shipped all around the world, and then it's being burned, and it's contributing to climate change. And again, when you and I or other people use electricity, we don't necessarily appreciate where that's coming from, and then the knock-on effects of us using that energy and then contributing to CO2 emissions. So you mentioned challenges earlier, and I think that kind of internationalization issue and the fact that a lot of these threats and issues are distributed makes our lives a little more difficult in terms of addressing these challenges. But on the flip side of that, one of the things that brings me hope is that we are becoming a more connected society. It is easier to travel and understand different cultures. And I think maybe if we can do that some more and we can better understand each other, then maybe we have some hope for addressing some of these global international challenges.
Thank you so much for joining me today for the Biodiversity Impact podcast, Tim.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be in this beautiful forest and talking biodiversity with you.
I really hope you found today's conversation with Tim interesting, inspiring, and insightful. If you like the podcast, please do subscribe on Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or any other place you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.